You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Along with frequent guest host Jim Shella, we have Robert T. Grand. Does that stand for like Tiberius?
No.
Tecumseh? Terry. He has been a fixture in both the legal world here in Indianapolis and beyond, but also has done significant political work. We're going to talk to him about his career and probably the most underrated aspect of Bob's contribution to Hoosiers, and that is his sterling and voluminous charity work. Jim, thank you for hanging.
How you doing? Robert, great to see you.
I'm great. Thank you. Great to be here.
It's okay if we call you Bob?
Yes.
You got to call me Robert.
Call him Robert, right.
So we can differentiate.
Right.
Well, you've got a long and varied background, but you started out as what, at least at the time, was a rare commodity, a Lake County Republican.
Correct.
How'd that happen?
Well, it happened because in 1964, our neighbor, who was a precinct committeeman, hired me to pass out Barry Goldwater handouts, and he gave me $1 for each block that I did. And so I became a Republican. My dad was then a steel worker, had just left and was on the process of leaving to become insurance salesman. My mother did not work outside the home, and so they were both from Gary, Indiana, and union backgrounds, but I became a little bit of a differential, if you will, in terms of the family network.
How old were you in 1964?
I was 9.
And that was your first political involvement?
That was my first job.
Been pretty active ever since?
Pretty active. I got involved in student government. Got involved in some of the young Republican things for Lake County. I was fortunate enough to serve. Only made one mistake that almost cost me that, is when I was asked by then Mitch Daniels to endorse Richard Lugar, the mayor of Indianapolis, in that 76 race. I neglected to tell my county chairman, who had actually endorsed Ed Whitcomb. So his view to me, the legendary Joe Cazzo, was, you better hope that your guy wins, because if he doesn't, you will not be the young Republican chairman. So,
and Richard Nixon won.
No, I'm Richard Lugar.
I mean, Richard Lugar. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We were talking about Nixon earlier.
Yeah, right.
You went to Wabash College.
Mm-hmm.
How come?
In large part because they hosted a symposium my junior year in high school, overflowing into my senior year. I guess it was the fall of my senior year. Maybe it was junior year. I'm sorry. And it was about their commitment to legal education. They brought in a lot of famous lawyers then, probably the most famous, Judge Peck of the New York Circuit or District Court. But they put on a big presentation about, this is the place you want to go if you want to be a lawyer, and I always wanted to be a lawyer, and I was fortunate enough to get in. although my guidance counselor told me I'd never make it there because I wasn't smart enough. But I ended up going, and a couple guys from my high school recruited me into the fraternity, and I had a great experience.
There's an awful lot of Republican leaders who have come out of Wabash College, and there's some Democrats too. But did you go there because it's something of a conservative hotbed?
I did not really. I didn't even think about it back in those days. I was my exposure to politics was I got recruited again to work on the Lugar campaign by Daniels and Mark Miles. And Matt
I was just going to ask you if you knew Miles and Wabash.
Miles put me to work. I went down to the county and had to fill out the county postcards with the voter IDs on it so that we could do a mailer to those folks. So that was kind of an interesting opportunity. And so I was able, and some notable, Ed McClain was there, a big Republican conservative from that area. Obviously, Dick Rustine, who became a great mentor. I learned a lot about his political career over the course of time.
Was David Brooks there when you were there?
David Brooks was there a year ahead of me.
So Brooks, and Miles were all at Wabash at the same time?
Miles and Brooks were on the tennis team together. And Brooks was probably one of the greatest Division III tennis players. Went to the national finals. So we were all there, and we were all pretty active. We had Scott Pastrick in our fraternity, whose dad was the legendary mayor of East Chicago. So that we had a
Democrat.
Democrat. So
his dad was the 1960 Kennedy chairman in Indiana, I do believe.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So, I mean, did you envision the sort of political involvement that you've had in your life before hooking up with these folks at Wabash?
I really didn't. As I said, my family background, my grandfather on my father's side was with the railroad union. Was actually a lobbyist at some point down here. So my other grandparents were all steel workers. Everybody was a steel worker or railroad folks, so they were all obviously came from a very union background where there weren't a lot of Republicans. But I had a great experience. I met a lot of neat people, and the college experience was particularly rewarding because, again, getting to work with Dick Lugar. I was invited the night of the victory in 1976, so that was a phenomenal opportunity and formed a great relationship. And he had actually spoken. He's a member of the same college fraternity I am, Beta Theta Pi, and I'd met him. And so he was a great role model, and as I think you know, I went on to serve as his treasurer for almost 25 years. But that initial networking was what got me into politics.
Okay. Your first real job, though, was working for Bob Orr.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the good example. I came to go to law school at night. During the day. My mother and I had saved up enough money for me to go full-time. So I went full-time the first year. I was running out of money, and I was volunteering. And so Gordon Durnell was running the 1979 effort for Bob Orr, and they had a deal where at the old Wilson building, they'd invite people over. You could stuff envelopes, lick envelopes, put stamps and whatever, and they'd buy you a pizza and beer. And I showed up, and because it was free pizza and free beer, I knew a couple of guys that were there. And one day, Gordon Durnell walked up to me and he said, "Hey, we understand you're in law school." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We understand you went to Wabash College." We said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you can write." Well, I can write, yeah. And so they put me to work doing a volunteer project on research. And the next thing I knew, I was sitting in the lieutenant governor's office, and he was offering me a job. It was a great, obviously, changed my life in that sense. I had to go to a night law school. But Bob Orr hired me and traveled with him the state for the better part of 3 years.
You were a scheduler?
I was a scheduler, advance man, constituency guy. You name it, I did it.
Bob Orr was not the most TV-ready governor. I think folks at home had a view of him as kind of a stiff sort of politician, but I'm thinking he was a great guy to learn from.
Well, every day, the guy worked from 6 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night, and for those times that I was with him, both when he was lieutenant governor and then the first 2 years of governor. I mean, that was nonstop. And in the days as lieutenant governor and in the campaign, it was just myself and he in a car. And so you can imagine the kinds of lessons, pulling off, on the way to Bloomington to see the, Civil War marker in Morgan County. I forget the name of the little town. And then being late for the event and him blaming me, but the guy, as I say many, many times, there's not a day that goes by that I am not thankful for the experience. But, here's a guy that, was a Yale undergraduate, 2 credits short of a Harvard MBA, and he left and enlisted in World War II. So, a finer man in terms, and a guy that, in his number one theory that he taught me, and I've tried to practice this over the years in terms of my own professional career, was 2 things. One, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, number one, arguably, and that's not really wasn't the case because he's a very smart guy. And number 2 was surround yourself with young people, and that's what he did.
And just quickly to append to that World War II story, and it may have been, I think it's Jim and Bob and Mark Lubbers and Darlene Sherman. We did the podcast just kind of commemorating Governor Orr's life. And that Harvard offered him the degree or something, and he wouldn't take it because he was 2 credits or he was short of it. And they were like, we'll just give it to you. And he said,
no. But he went for the honorary degree. And, that was back when I was practicing law. Then I was his outside counsel. And don't ask me how I got involved in this, but he was so adamant that they had me talk to the office, the alumni affairs, and he had to have a stipulation that they would not award him the actual degree, but they would give him an honorary degree. To which the then president of Harvard, I can't remember who it was, actually called me on the phone and started yelling at me. Like, this is the stupidest thing we've ever heard. You're offered a degree from Harvard. And so, but when he showed up at the reunion, it was his 40th, 44. Mm-hmm. He showed up at the reunion and to the 60 or 70 classmates were all just like, this is the coolest thing in the world, that you.
Like George C. Scott saying, no, I don't want that Oscar. Or Marlon Brando. Did you know Bob back in the Orr days?
No. I came to town in 82, and as Bob just said, he left the governor's office in 81. I'm sure.
82. We overlapped for, I think, a year.
Okay, I didn't get to town until December of 82.
Yeah.
I
left and I graduated 82, so yeah.
Yeah. So,
right,
Bob was around. He was around. We got acquainted fairly early on, I'm sure, but I don't believe he was in the governor's office when I got to know him.
No.
You talked about some of the people you met in Wabash. Please describe some of the people you met working for Bob Orr, because it really is a college of cardinals when it comes to accomplishments and influence on the state.
Well, the staff people, all very, very close. Obviously Ken Cochran was the chief of staff, and he and John Hammond. John Hammond left the job to go to the campaign. That's what opened up for me, and those are the 2 guys that actually came. People always say, as recently as 2 weeks ago, somebody said, well, they didn't want to invite Bob Grant and have him in the same room with John Hammond, and the person, Lubbers, said to him, are you crazy? Those guys were like best friends, and nobody could believe it. They think that all these years that we've done all these things. John and I are extremely close.
But you worked at competing law firms.
Well, we were. It would be logical, but the sense is that everybody does it. But we were extraordinarily loyal to each other, and we get together on a regular occasion. But so Jan Powell was in charge of the media. She was a very good person. But the special relationship that I had was with Judge Ryan. He was a guy that kind of adopted me, and the reason why he adopted me was because when I got hired, I had been in the legislature. I had been Phil Warner's legislative assistant, and they had tried to the ISTA
Republican from Elkhart.
Yeah, and they tried to. He was the chairman of the Education Committee, and the ISTA tried to beat him one year, and they lost. And so the next year, you can imagine the kinds of bills that got introduced, and I was his person. And so what happened was Bob Orr hired me on a kind of a very quick interview. Whatever, I came in, put a suit and tie on, I got hired, and I was going to start the next week because John was anxious to get to the campaign. So this was all just a real flurry. I had to go re-enroll in the law school, everything. And the first day on the job, Judge Ryan walks into my office. If those of you remember him, he was a short man, a great Irishman. With a cigarette in his mouth, and I had an office with one little chair, and I was backed up to a window. And the guy walks in and he sits down and he looks across at me and he says, I love you. Now, this is back in the 70s. The people just don't say this, right? And you're looking at him and, I'm thinking to myself, this is the weirdest thing in the world, and he takes a drag on a cigarette and he goes, you don't know why. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a trick question. I don't know what the answer is. And he goes, well, he said the ISTA leadership just came in an hour ago and they demanded that Bob Orr fire you because you are the most, headstrong, anti-education guy they've ever met. You were Phil Warner's legislative assistant. I mean, seriously. And so he said, so I looked at Bob Orr. I said, this is the best hire we've ever made. And so he goes, I don't know you, never met you, but you're my guy. So he went on to do great things for me and was very helpful.
Well, and Bob Orr's legacy ended up being improvements in education in his second term, lower class sizes and the A+ program. And I remember Phil Warner chairing those committee hearings because he allowed all testimony. They went on forever.
Right. And you in the podcast we did about Governor Orr, which I didn't realize till after the podcast, I looked it up. Amazingly, when the top of the ticket, President Reagan is winning 49 states, Orr barely won re-election in 84. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? Or almost happen, I guess I should say. And Bob, were you involved and worried?
I was involved, not overly worried. We had a national polling outfit out of I forget who. I could see his face, but we were not overly worried in the sense because we knew that there was a strong undercurrent there. He took a lot of heat on the utility issue. He took a lot of heat. Wayne Townsend, and Ann Delaney were two firebrands. I mean, they were after him every day of the week, and it goes to show what I say to people when I coach them in campaigns. You have to be aggressive on your message. I mean, you can't just let things be, and you have to respond. And Bob Orr was, in my opinion, I don't think he wanted to respond. I don't think people thought he needed to respond a whole bunch, but they put some pain on him. But overall,
well, the biggest problem he had was he raised taxes in 82.
Yeah, and he raised taxes in 82, which hurt him. Mm-hmm. But he'd also been the vote that he cast the vote for property tax relief, so he broke that tie. And that was a big legacy for him. But, it was a tough year, but I wouldn't say I was worried. I think we were all, a little bit nervous. We were really worried. We were really worried in 82. 82, we were really worried because had that election gone another 6 or 8 weeks, we would have been in trouble.
Gordon Durnell, who ran that campaign for Bob Orr as well, had negative ads prepared. At that point, it seems weird to talk about now in today's environment, but there had never been a negative ad run in a statewide campaign in Indiana, and Bob Orr had negative ads prepared because they were concerned that Wayne Townsend was too close, too late.
And the most amazing thing about those ads, which you didn't see, but one of the great things was the debate. So I was in charge of all the opposition research, myself, another lawyer. And the best line ever, which really was incredible, is that Wayne Townsend, in all the years he'd been in the House and the Senate, had never authored, co-authored, sponsored, or co-sponsored any bill to do with education. Okay? And it was an amazing statistic. And so when I came into the meeting with Gordon and John and Ken, and I presented this research, Bob Orr looked at me and he goes, there's no way that's true. And I had been through every single record. Back then you had to go to the archives. They were open historical. I mean, I went through every single vote, right? I had to go do it again. He said, we're not going to go that. And he did and I did. I came back and he looked me in the eye and he said, I'm going to make this statement in this debate. And he made it. And, of course, Bill Morrow, who's a longtime friend of mine, after that debate was just like, where in the heck did you come up with that? Of course, nobody ever said it was wrong, right? I mean, but it was a pretty powerful deal.
Speaking of Bill Morrow and elections, 1988, I'm going to assume, forgive me for doing so, that you were close or knew John Mutz a little bit.
Yeah.
Were you involved in that campaign?
No, I really wasn't involved in that campaign per se because I was involved being helpful, and I was trying to help Bob Orr because I was serving as Bob Orr's person, but I wasn't involved like, you would say involved. Mike McDaniel was the lead on that. I had a great relationship with Mike. But that was a difficult campaign, and there were a lot of issues. But in part, I think that Bob Orr did, had, as you mentioned, the people had perceived the '84 election being close. Question was, what could Bob Orr really do in '88? He did as much as he could. I mean, he helped John a lot, particularly in the convention, the direct primary, the lieutenant governor. Mm. He let that postcard go out that had a picture with him and John Mutz the week before, which was raised a lot of controversy. But
why was it controversial?
Because it was essentially an endorsement, and McDaniel was genius. He still to this day denies he didn't, but it was an endorsement. It was read as an endorsement, and it became an endorsement. And it's one of the reasons why I think they were so close, because Otis Bowen had done the same thing for Bob Orr. I mean, he spent every waking moment promoting Bob Orr to be the next governor, and Bob Orr spent every waking moment promoting John Mutz.
Were you covered that race, obviously, Jim? Were you
Yes.
surprised at the outcome?
No.
By beating Mutz?
No. You're in '88 now. I was still stuck in '84. No, I was not surprised that Evan Bayh beat John Mutz in 1988. Evan Bayh was the hot new property, and there had been a long string of Republicans, and the public was ready for a change.
And we made a terrible mistake, and there were differences of opinions. I go back and relitigate it, because most of those people are not alive. But it was a mistake, and I think people thought to go with the challenge on the residency. Mm. Bob Orr was focused on an election in South Carolina that occurred the year before, where they had not done that. And the person, it got to the end and it became a big problem. So he decided to put it up first and foremost. And it was just, it created Evan and Susan on the nightly news. I mean, that Shelbyville, in and out of that courtroom every day, in and out with a commentary with Jim Shella standing there saying, "Don't you think this is outrageous? I mean, your father was a United States senator, and so it."
I don't think I put it quite like that.
No, I'm just kidding.
but that's really, I mean, when you stand back and take the long view, it was an effort to show that Evan Bayh was not a Hoosier, and the public didn't buy that.
That was the great irony of when he got beat the last time, of going back the opposite, right? Tried to become a Hoosier when you clearly were not in this, whatever. So then it's just a great. I just think the whole residency thing is just crazy, and it was proven in that case. It was proven they went after Dick Lugar. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, you're a Hoosier. And I think that was going to be a hard thing. But I think it was a big mistake.
Yeah. So you went into the practice of law, Barnes and Thornburg, but never got out of politics.
I was in Bingham Summers, actually, for 4 years.
Okay.
I went to Barnes in 1987.
Okay.
I never really did get out of politics, because when I left the governor's office, the governor really was not. He let me leave, but that would be the way to describe it. He let me leave, but part of the condition of me leaving was that I had to stay involved with him and be helpful. Like I said, I took on the research, great experience. And then where I really got my big is that he called me in one day and he gave me a $50 bill and he said, "You are going to take a lady by the name of Marge O'Loughlin out to lunch because I'm going to have you run her campaign." And I'd never met Marge O'Loughlin. I know who she was. I knew a lot of her convention stuff. She'd been a good, popular person, and didn't realize that she was the one that cast the votes to make Bob Orr the lieutenant governor. So that became obvious later on in this whole story. But the truth of the matter is I didn't know her. I took her to the King Cole. I paid for lunch. The next day, the governor called me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I got a 1-year-old child. I'm not sure I'm up for a campaign." And then 2 consecutive days, the managing partner of Bingham Summers came into my office and said, "I got a strange call from the governor today." And he said he just sent this big piece of business, and he really wanted me just to come and tell you that they were using us on this. And second day, and so the third day I picked up the phone, I called him, I said, "I get the message." He goes, "I'm glad, because I was going to call the managing partner and just take that business back."
Well, that happened.
Well, and Marge was running for state treasurer.
Right. And Thuma had been endorsed by Otis Bowen. Then Otis Bowen had to drop out of the race because of the Hatch Act, because he became secretary of HHS.
That's right.
So there was Marge O. And I could kid about Bob Orr. Obviously, he was always kidding me about the opportunities. He'd given me a lot of business, but I could just tell that he really wanted me to do this deal, and we joked about it all the time. And
Marge O'Loughlin, one of 4 people?
Yeah.
Is it 5? 4. To have won 4 statewide elections on her own. It's her, Lugar, Evan Bayh. Anybody know the other one?
Whew. I'm not good at trivia.
Yeah.
Tim Berry.
Tim Berry?
I think those are the only ones. So please correct me, Leaders and Legends audience, if not. What was Marge O'Loughlin like, other than like shaking her hand a few times?
Unbelievable. I mean, she was just a great. And again, this whole.
I just didn't know her.
Yeah, this whole great idea about just such a really nice, pleasant person, and like I said, Bob Orr had such a great relationship with her, and she had a lot of issues when she got elected state treasurer. There were a number of people that wanted certain people to have other appointments, and he helped her. They were extremely close. But that's why I joke with people. They always come back to this whole idea about Bob Orr putting pressure. I mean, it was a subtle pressure. I joke about it in the sense that he really wanted her to have a campaign manager, and he wanted me to do it. And it was the greatest thing that happened, because once we did that race and we raised all that money, because back then you could take money from investment bankers and all the people that were interested, right? I know it's all bad now, but we raised a lot of money, and she ran a phenomenal ads. We did display negative ads, not the first time, but the second time, because you ran against a guy named Rich Bell, which we didn't have to expend any negative ads. Pat Traub helped us immensely on that one, because he accused her of a crime, essentially, on some kind of deal. And so Pat Traub wrote article after article about how we should prosecute him, and whatever. But she was just a magnificent woman, a great party person, and somebody that was just a loyal friend and a great person.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest today is Bob Gran. Our co-host is Jim Shella. Bob, other than, let's say, maybe Lugar and Orr or whatever, is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire?
Well, I think you go back, if you say, putting those folks up there in terms of the career that they did and the things that I had. I mentioned those people were very influential in my life. I mean, in every aspect of my life. And then Dick Lugar, wrote me a letter to get into law school, a recommendation letter. I mean, like I said, Bob Orr, Marge O'Loughlin gave me an incredible opportunity as a young lawyer. I'd say in politics, you meet a lot of really interesting people. I think probably in later years, one of the most interesting people that I ended up having a relationship with, Robert, as you know, was P. McAllister. And both you and I spent in different ways, but I think in the similar is just trying to help P.E. as he wanted to be involved in politics, had been involved in everything in the community. In the later years, I think people looked at him as that this guy's very wealthy and whatever, but he had so much to add. The little things that he did and getting involved, he had unbelievable with the CIB, bringing the Colts. I mean, he was just involved with everything. And one of the great honors is I got to take him to the White House when the Colts won the White House. I got tickets. And I took him, or I should say he took me. He said, "You get the tickets, I'll get the plane." But we went to the White House. As a matter of fact, one of that, and I don't think I've told this story publicly, but one of the best stories ever about that was that we went in there, and so the Bobby Van's is a famous steakhouse, and so PE wants to have lunch because the ceremony's at 2:30. We get there at 11. So he says, "Where do we go?" I said, "Well, Bobby Van's is this great steakhouse." So we have with us the folks that were there, many of whom are very important people. Todd Houston was there because he was worked on the Bush campaign, so he was one of the invitees. One of my partners, Ken Yerke's one of my partners, Brian Burdick, P. and myself. But if you could imagine, this is one of my favorite stories. We go into Bobby Van's, and of course, because I've been in there all the time, I get the front table. So the guy says, "What do you want your regulars for lunch?" I said, so I take the front table. So we're at the front table, and of course, what does PE order but a martini? So then everybody feels like they have to order a martini, and of course, what does he order? But he orders a big steak, so everybody figures like they got to order steak. So you can imagine this day, everybody sit their coats and ties, and his family walks in, obviously on spring break or whatever, and you can see him pause at the door. And I'm seated at the far end of the table with my back, but I can see him, and what's his name? Bobby Vans is talking to him, so I can seat you away and whatever. And one of the kids says, "Mom, what's that?" And you see her go to her kids. "That's called lobbyists." One of the greatest lines ever, right?
That is the story you told. You and I were very blessed to be two of his eulogists, along with Jim Morris and Earl Good. We should notice at the time of PE's martini ordering that he was about 88, 89.
So here's an amazing thing, Robert. I don't know if you know this, but at Meridian Hills, so I would go with him to Meridian Hills all the time. They would bring his martini out first, which, always used to irritate me. I'd say, I'm a member too, and he'd laugh, whatever, but they do it. So upon his passing, I went in one day, and they came in and they said, I said, "I'm going to get a P. McAllister, whatever." And so they brought it, and then Cheryl, the legendary waitress there, said, "Well, it's a problem. We have to, they wouldn't fill it, so I'm going to go into the." I go, "What do you mean they wouldn't fill it?" They said, "Well, Mr. McAllister had a special glass that we gave him that's much larger than the rest, and the new waiter would do it." So I'm thinking the whole time I'm having one, he says, "I only have one." His is a time and a half mine, I'm having two, thinking I'm an alcoholic, right? So,
as my daughter says, he was the cutest.
Yes.
The best of the greatest, and no replacement. I would like to ask you a little bit, outside of Indiana, you were involved in what was probably the biggest political story in the last 50 years, maybe? Political story. We'll see what happens with Mr. Trump. But the Florida recount. Mm-hmm. How did you get involved in the 2000 Florida recount, and what was it like?
I was just interviewed by the Politico guy, I forget his name.
Adam
No, his buddy who's writing a book on it. The simple answer is that I'd been very involved in that campaign. A number of us had gone down. Al Hubbard, Kittle, Daniels, myself, Hubbard went down and met with Governor Bush prior to his announcement, and we had signed on to participate with him. So we were in on the kind of ground floor of that whole deal. And as a result of that, in the meeting out came Karl Rove, and people had forgotten that Karl Rove did the direct mail for John Mutz in that 1988 campaign. So everybody knew Karl Rove, and I had a little bit of a relationship with Karl, but because I was the youngest guy, he and I got to be very close, and with Mitch, and things. So that relationship really blossomed in the campaign. I became one of the fundraisers along with Al and Kittle, and so we just had a great relationship. And then when the election occurred, Karl Rove called me that Sunday after the election, and a week later actually, and said, "We need you in Florida. We need a lawyer down there. We need help," because they were staffing it largely with kind of volunteers, if you will. And the Democrats had shipped in all these union folks and a bunch of hardline people, and so we were facing in the three counties. And so my son was playing a championship game, basketball, and I couldn't go Sunday night, but Monday morning I showed up with then Betsy Burdick, now Betsy Wiley, because she was the only person who could go with me. Everybody else had conflicts, and her brother was a law partner of mine, but her parents and I were very close. So she was just great. So she went down there with us. And I say we just showed up at the airport back in those days. They gave us a ticket, one-way ticket to Palm Beach. And we went down there and saddled up and were there until until Thanksgiving Day. We flew back Thanksgiving Day. So,
what was the I mean, we can guess, but do you have any good stories about the atmosphere? Was it just daggers drawn? And by the way, I want Betsy Wiley on my team for any fight involving just about anything.
She was unblazed, yeah.
Had you ever heard of a hanging Chad prior to that?
No, I had not. But nor I had heard of the butterfly ballots. But I'm quite an expert on all that. There are so many great stories, but I think the way it started off was probably the best. Was we got there, they introduced me at the airport. They told me that my other 4 team members would meet me there. They were all guys from D.C. And Betsy and I, of course, they had a van rented for us. We had a hotel. When we went to the Holiday Inn, they already had our names. I mean, everything was all prearranged. But the great story was we had to go for training, and we show up at the training, and there's only 2 other lawyers, so I'm the third lawyer, so they got to help me go through all the process. How do you go in? What do you do? With big training, but most of that. But the best line is that when I go in, they drop us off at the van, drops us off at the emergency operations center, and the driver says to the six of us, I hope you guys are ready to go do this, because if you screw this up, you might cost the guy presidency of the United States. We're like, whew, a little harsh. But when you walked in, they had two checkpoints. They had a checkpoint to go in and a checkpoint internally. Okay, the one outside was the county's check-in to know who that was going into their emergency operations center. Well, as you can imagine, as you've seen the pictures, the entire parking lot was satellite trucks from everywhere, right? So I went in, we did our first session. It was pretty uneventful. We had a couple of, arguments and whatever. Betsy had one phenomenal argument. And so we came out, and the press they were restricted as to where they could be, but they could be like within shouting of you. And 5 or 6 of these folks start shouting my name. Bob Grand, we want to talk to you. Bob Grand, we want to talk to you. And so all of a sudden, I'm identified. I can't figure out how. And they didn't have anybody else's name. So when we went to the curb, I decided, I just not going to ignore them. I just said, look, we know who you are. You're a lawyer from Indianapolis, blah, 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 blah. They're going through all this stuff. And so finally I look at the guy. I said, well, how do you know that? He goes, pal. He said, when you pulled your license out for the outside check-in, I said, every camera in every satellite truck was on your license, okay? I mean, that's how they do it. And so they followed me. I became kind of the guy that they followed. So when you went to the hotel, they were there. When I went for breakfast, they'd sit there and friendly, not unfriendly, but I was.
Reporters are generally friendly.
They were friendly, yeah, but they were all in about every day what was happening. And of course, your comment was no comment, and.
Were you there, Jim?
You know what? My story of the 2000 recount is I've, not to get too personal, but I've had glaucoma since I was 18, and I was in need of an operation, and I said I got to get past the election. So I scheduled, and November's always a rating period in the TV business. So I had surgery scheduled for the end of November, and I spent most of my time in the hospital watching this on TV. I probably would have been there otherwise, but I thought, nothing's going to happen after this election.
Were you surprised? Are you somewhat? Let me ask a different way. My understanding is, and Jim, please correct me, that every single recount conducted after the 2000 election was decided in Florida, in other words, Bush v. Gore and then Gore's concession speech, that every single recount put Bush as winning the state.
Yes.
Does that make you feel better about the work you did, or you felt like you were...
Look, the work that we did was really, I said this before, and I used, for a while I was on the speaking tour for a couple of years. I went to about every Lincoln Day because it was kind of an interesting, story to tell. The story is, the thing that made it really interesting was, number one, when we got there was very little security over where the ballots were being held, which has always made me nervous in terms of with the recount, at least in West Palm. And so that was one issue. The other issue was these ballots that had Scotch tape shads back in. I always ask the question, who goes to the ballot box, who goes to the election day with Scotch tape, right? I mean, so there were things like that were anomalies, whatever. And but the chads falling off, right, in these boxes, and, people would collect them, right? They had little, things of them. I mean, it gave you a little bit of pause for what the recount really meant. I would tell you in the count, though, there were very few of both Gore and Bush being clicked out, right? I mean, so that part of the count was good. A lot of the other ballots, the hanging chads, did you count it? Was it? Well, in that case, if one's hanging and the other one's still intact, well, why wouldn't you count it, right? I mean, that was the debate. But it was a little bit disconcerting to see how many of those chads had fallen off, or in the process of handling, or whatever. So, but it gave us, we felt pretty good because no matter what they did, the count was a hard count. I mean, even though it was staffed with some were Republican, Democrat, Independent, never Republican Independent. There was never a time where there was a Republican Independent. So it was kind of a weird one there, but I didn't see any wholesale problems there. Our job was just to get the count, turn it in, and when we objected, they took it under advisement.
Well, speaking of your involvement in national stories. You were on the presidential inaugural committee in 2016. How did that happen?
Well, that happened largely because I was asked by then Governor Mike Pence to handle his vetting, if you will, with the campaign. So I got involved. A young lawyer in our office, Matt Morgan, and I were the guys that were, called to the scene for that effort. So I had a great involvement at that point with the governor. Obviously, I knew Mike Pence from law school, and we were very, very close, although I kidded him I didn't support him the first couple of times he ran for Congress. So he ran against good friends of mine. But he had asked us to help with that, so that led to some additional involvement in the campaign. And then at the end, we knew because of how difficult it was going to be to put on a decent inaugural. Although when you think about inaugurations, then you think about the Bush inaugural, which was even tougher because the time crunch was so. Sure. It was like the transition was incredibly hard. So that was the reason why I was asked. But more so was my relationship with the governor and the VP.
He had a pretty good seat at the inaugural.
Yeah, right behind Hillary Clinton.
At one point, didn't we all work for Marty Opes?
Yes, right. Yeah. So Marty was very helpful. But yeah, that was the picture that went viral when they put that out, and there was the picture of Hillary, and I was right behind it, and it was incredible. I mean, people still to this day will come up and they'll have it on their phone. They'll say, "I remember this picture." But of course, the worst part was what people never made a big issue out of, which if you go back and see the tape, if you watch it carefully and listen to it, the most amazing thing was when we were put down into the holding room. I was with Fred Klipsch and some other folks, and Fred decided that on the way out to the thing that he was going to go stop at the bathroom. I decided to stop at the bathroom. So we went in, and our group had kind of gotten separated. So we went to this where it looked like where the Supreme Court had just walked through, and that was the holding room. So we were just standing there. And our people were supposed to come back and get us, and they didn't show up for a while. And so we're just standing around talking to people. And, of course, Mattis walks up to me and says, "Who are you?" Because they obviously didn't know each other, and whatever. Coates was there, and Coates was laughing. He said, "Well, it's Bob Grand." And so Mattis, "What are you?" I said, "I'm the lawyer to the campaign or to the vice president, whatever." "Really?" As he starts telling me stories about how he likes lawyers and all this kind of stuff, whatever. So they start lining up for the cabinet. And so Klipsch and the other guys moved immediately to the left because the lady comes and gets them and doesn't get me, doesn't say a word to me. So now I'm over here, and I see this lineup, and so Mattis is going here, and I say to Mattis, "Well, I got to step aside here," and there's a lady standing over there. I said, "I think if that's with you, that lady's with you or whatever." No, that's my best friend's wife. I got her a seat on the platform. I really enjoy talking with you. Just stick with me for a minute. So so we're talking and whatever, and all of a sudden they announced the cabinet. And so as they walked in, they never pulled me out of the line. So when they announced the cabinet, I walked in next to Mattis, and immediately my wife was seated to the left on the platform. I see her. Her eyes are like this. I come by, and the four Joint Chiefs of Staff turn around and introduce themselves to me. And my wife goes, "Do you realize you just got announced as a member of the cabinet?" They said, "The cabinet is processing in. You just walked in with Mattis." And the greatest irony of it is my now just recently deceased best friend from college, Jim Ingledow, was having his employees watch it in one of their big rooms. He said there were 35 people assembled, and when it happened and when it flashed on the screen, the cabinet, I walked in, he goes, "Oh, my God." He said, "Something bad's going to happen because that guy is not in the cabinet." So later the folks with the inaugural committee came up to me that afternoon. They go, "Holy mackerel, was that incredible? You know how many calls we've had from people like, who in the hell was that guy next to Mattis? They have no idea who you were."
And what are you, 6'5", so you can't hide?
Couldn't hide. But the best was the reaction of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because they were all now my best friends, because they thought, I was Mattis, whatever. So,
I should say and be
Forrest Gump. It was a Forrest Gump moment.
That Bob went to bat for me to try to get me a job at the Pentagon after the Trump election in 2016, and I was newly married and had two younger kids, and I couldn't do it. But Bob, I'm very grateful for you putting my name in the hopper. I want to ask a little bit about another campaign and candidate You're going to love this one, Jim. The accidental mayor. Greg Ballard.
Where have I heard that phrase before?
I think you said it on election night 2007 when you were standing next to me while we were doing coverage of that particular upset.
I haven't coined too many phrases, but I'll take credit for that.
Bob, you were on the Ballard train from Go.
Not from Go, but almost Go.
Well, compared to everyone else,
you were on from Go. Yeah, I was there because my wife and my wife Melody and my son Ryan had run cross country with his two kids, and so they knew. So my wife came home after she met with Lisa Kobe at something. I forget where they were at. She said, we're doing a fundraiser at our house. Now, keep in mind, I've done fundraisers at my home for many, many years and had any number of people there. And I said, dear, this is like crazy. She goes, we're doing this fundraiser, and you're doing it, and you're putting your name on it. And so
this fundraiser for Ballard.
For Ballard. And he had not one big fundraiser. He had a couple of small ones. Most people were giving money to the party. Somebody was quoted the other day. They were talking about all they did for Ballard. I thought I didn't want to correct them, but the party was raising money for the council. There was nobody giving money to Ballard. But
and he raised this $265, I think.
He ran exactly one TV ad.
Right. We ran this fundraiser, and all of a sudden people start calling me like Jim Merritt, Scott Newman. I mean, everybody, well, if you're going to do this, and then we put our names on it, and we did it at our home, and we had a really good turnout. I mean, it was phenomenal turnout, and it was all handmade sandwiches, handmade. Somebody got some liquor from Jim Brucker donor. So it was like the lowest fundraising cost ever because all these people had volunteered to bring, like sandwiches and stuff. But we had it at our home, and he was very humble, and he made some statement about, whatever, and we raised, I think it was about a third or a quarter of what was on hand. And that led to a number of other people stepping up. PE had already stepped up, but even in a bigger way, and others. And it was exciting, and the best line I had in that thing was the week before when Bart Peterson gone on the radio and essentially said that he didn't think Mayor Ballard had the skills to be mayor because, he was just in the military or something to that effect, which was ridiculous, and that lit up the virtual thing. But the other thing was when they ran that little, like a small buy on WIBC against Ballard, and I called him up. Of course, he had no idea and he didn't really know me that well, but he knew me. I called him up and said, man, you're going to win. And he says, how can you tell? I said, there's no way in the world they're running a negative ad on you if they don't have polling that shows you up. Of course, that's when the tax took effect in October, right? Mm-hmm. In that week, and it was before all that early voting. It was amazing to watch it. Right?
Jim, did you cover that race pretty solidly?
Yes. And the other thing I said on election night was that the race was Bart Peterson versus not Bart Peterson, right. And not Bart Peterson won.
Right. I just remember. Go ahead.
Greg Ballard, had a great tenure as mayor, but nobody knew who he was. He had zero name ID. So
it's just like what we're doing right now. I mean, we're going through this right now. I mean, it's the end of the day is the idea that you can elect somebody because of what's happening in your city. In that case, with taxes and everything else, with raising the tax, it was a big deal. The one thing that people don't give Mayor Ballard credit for, which he really did do, and I've said this to folks in recent times, is that he actually did go out a lot of places and had the right. I've been telling Republicans, stop on Pennsylvania Street today, right, and go up to the door or across the street from the big pothole and say, look, well, and he did a lot of that. He went to neighborhoods, he talked to people. We had those townships for a day, and he kept a list of all this stuff. I mean, sewer, and he couldn't fix it all, but that did resonate a little bit. But the tax issue in Meridian Kessler and closing the police station there, one of my favorite lines was, Lisa Kobe, every time she did a press conference with him, every single time she did it in front of that police station, So here we are in front of a closed down police station at 43rd College, blah, blah, blah. And one time Dennis Ryerson, the wonderful publisher of the Star, called me up. And I was a decent relationship with him. And he said, I can't believe you keep doing that. It's my neighborhood. Where we go. Well, now we're going to do it forever.
Let me ask him about a few other folks.
Sure.
we're going to run through. I'll just throw some names out, 1 or 2 sentences, and then we can move on. I'll let Jim have the last word before we do the 5 questions. Mitch Daniels.
Wonderful guy. Really gave me a great opportunity. He denies the story, so Lubbers would tell you, it can't be a few seconds because it's true. They sent me to the Wabash College Chapel the night that Whitcomb was speaking, and I was in college. And you know what my question to Whitcomb was? Why did he veto the 18-year-old drinking law bill? So you imagine he went crazy on me, and all the people in Crawfordsville who loved me were really upset with me. And so Mitch Daniels denies that, but that I had that level of involvement. He gave me a great opportunity because the night of that election, he personally invited me and young guys from Wabash College to come over to the celebration. I got to tell you, it was life-changing in that sense. So what he did as governor, I'll always appreciate, but I obviously knew him back then. And I think he was the one that probably wrote the letter. I know Lugar had edited it, but people wrote those letters for law school. I know chiefs of staff had something to do with it.
Did you get to be close with Senator Lugar?
Yes. Yeah.
He was an interesting guy in the sense that I never saw him in a bad mood ever.
Yeah, never. Except when you made him make fundraising calls, then he was in a bad mood. So, but the most fun I ever had with him was the '96 Iowa. I was with him in Iowa for that part of the campaign, and just the daily routine and watching him interact with people and watching his thought process. I mean,
the story of the Iowa caucuses for him in '96 was mostly that he couldn't get there.
Right.
Bob Dole was holding up the vote on the farm bill,
everything,
so that Lamar Alexander and Dick Lugar couldn't get to Iowa. I was in Iowa a week before the caucuses.
Right. You're right.
Went out there. Had arranged to meet with Senator Lugar, and he couldn't get there for 3 days.
Yeah.
And
it was a travesty in that sense, but he wasn't going to miss votes, and that was the difference.
Yeah.
Mark Miles.
Great relationship with Mark, still to this day. I mean, but another one. He just, he was in a rival fraternity, and but he reached out to me with Mac McNaught, and they gave me, what I would say is, volunteer work, and. So, and then he gave me what I thought was the greatest honor ever until Bob Orr told me that it wasn't, and that was in the Pan Am Games. Miles called me into his office one day, and he said, I got a job for you. I said, what's that? I said, you're going to be in charge of all the credentials for all the VIPs, elected officials, legislature, everything else. I said, man, that's really good. So I was having dinner that evening with Bob Orr. I said, I just got this unbelievable thing from Mark Miles. And Bob Orr leans over the table. He goes, are you kidding me? Do you realize how many people you're going to irritate? How many people you're going to say no to? He said, you don't have enough credentials to take care of everybody. He goes, that's a terrible job. And Miles always denies whatever. I laugh, and I said, but it was a great job. But, man, I did have to say no to some people. Right? I had to do the ranking, right? Okay, well, House Ways and Means, yep, you got your tickets. Newly elected person from wherever, Covington, Indiana. No, I don't know who you are.
I'm having breakfast with Mr. Miles tomorrow. I'm going to ask him about this when I see him.
It was a great opportunity, though. And I got to meet some unbelievable people during that deal.
I'll give you 2 more. Ed Tracy.
Ed and I had a lot of fun because, he was always lobbying the governor for the Chiropractic Association, and Ken Cochran's brother was a chiropractor, and I was very close to his brother, and I never got caught up in all these issues. And so Ed kind of sought me out a lot of times because nobody would give him an answer. And so he would call me. I was a young guy. And he entertained me and took me out or whatever. I became very close to him. And then when he got involved, obviously, the partisan politics, he was always very friendly, and we had some great laughs. And I showed up at John Taylor. Remember John Taylor, the
Absolutely.
I got to be close with him because he called me one day and he said, everybody that I know says you're an asshole. I said, but one guy says you're not. So I want to meet you. So I had lunch with him, and so I got invited to his 60th birthday party, which was the Democrat National or State Committee, City Committee. Tracy walked up to me and goes, this is like the worst in the world. What are you doing here?
Well, Dave, for those who don't know, John Taylor was a Democrat attorney who worked for the House of Representatives for years. Did you ever see the doodling that he would do during meetings?
Not doodling. Everything he ever did was a handwritten note. He never sent an email.
But he would do it was artwork.
Yeah.
He would do these geometric drawings that when he was sitting in meetings. It was amazing stuff.
I got lots of more names, but in the interest of time, I'm going to throw out Mr. Jim Voiles.
You know, Jim is just a legendary guy. We worked a lot, or not worked a lot. We got together pretty much during the Mitch Daniels campaign because he was, you know, he might not admit this, but he was one of those Democrat folks that was very enthralled with, you know, a guy like Mitch Daniels. He and a bunch of those guys. I got to know him pretty well then, and now in the Bar Association I've been involved in. His grandson caddies has caddied for me out at Meridian Hills, which is he's always like, yeah, I have to go to my holiday gatherings and hear somebody says this is a really wonderful person, Bob Grant. So that kind of gets him crazy.
Speaking of law school letters, my son starts law school in the fall.
Oh, great!
Dad at McKinney, and his letter was from Jim Voiles.
That's great.
And I looked at Andrew and said, "Son, if this doesn't get you in, you don't have a chance in hell."
That's true.
Jim, you have a question or two before we end?
Well, sure. I mean, we've talked about how you've been a volunteer and a staffer and a fundraiser and a lobbyist. Why haven't you ever run for office?
I think two reasons. One, I really was focused on being a lawyer. That's what I always wanted to be. And I had opportunities, at Barnes & Thornburg, tremendous opportunities. One to take over as the Indianapolis office managing partner, which is a tremendous honor. I did that in my late 30s. And then I had the opportunity to run the firm. And so in that time period, I would have been probably a good candidate for something in my own mind, maybe. But and then secondly, I just, I saw what it did to people and their families, and I just, I really didn't, my family has been supportive. I don't think they would be supportive of me running for office, but I think they've been supportive of everything else I've done, and I just didn't think it was that important. And lastly, the CIB chairmanship kind of gave me all I really wanted in that. I mean, that was just really that was really a tough situation for me. It was very difficult to do, and it was constantly being, subject to everything that you could ever imagine, every allegation, whatever, all of which was not true. But it was a tough role. So kind of after that, I thought to myself, yeah.
But you thought about it.
I thought about it. Yeah.
You looked at running for mayor this time?
I did. But the truth of the matter is that again, Barnes and Thornburg had, in the deal that they did for me in this transition, it was very important. They did me a great thing. They said, we really want you to stay this year, and so this is kind of my final year. Although now they extended to another year, but it was important to me for the firm. It was important for what they've done for me. So yeah, I toyed with the idea, but
You're involved in so many charities and nonprofits. Little Red Door, I know, is a big one for you. Urban League, Indianapolis Foundation. How much of you've obviously been very successful, and deservedly so, but how much of your devotion and dedication to helping charities relates back to your own youth background and how you grew up?
Totally. I mean, I had, my dad was seriously injured in a car accident, hit by two drunk drivers when I was 10. I was raised by a village of teachers, coaches. There were unknown charitable things that I know were done for me over the course of time. I never had to worry about going to college because two people in my community told me, if you run out of money, we'll write you the check. And so I never had to draw on the check. But and my parents, and my mother in particular, with all the things that happened, they were very they're very charitable in a long, and my grandmother, my mother's side was, she was unbelievably charitable. She used to bake pies for every organization in Gary, Indiana. So I think I heard a lot about it, and I thought, you got to give back. I mean, that's the key.
And you had a friend whose family was very helpful, as I recall.
Yes. Yeah. So as a matter of fact, he just passed away. His mother passed away last year, and he passed away. So it's been a tough year for that. Yeah. He kind of raised me. Lovers and I actually did the Luger bus trip in '82 in their basement. We stayed overnight. The people said, well, you can just stay in our basement. We said, okay. So, Lovers up all night doing all these maps, where's this avenue in Hammond and whatever. So, Yeah, a lot of people were good to me. So at the end of the day, you got to pay something back. But I always thought the greatest. Everybody always, Bob Orr used to say about press written about you, the best press that was ever written about me was when Russ Pulliam wrote an article years ago, which said I was the most unlikely guy that he would have ever figured out to have been as charitable. He listed all my, things. We just don't think this guy is would fit this criteria. And it was in good spirit, but he'd gotten involved when I got involved with outreach, the homeless shelter. But it was kind of funny because everybody got a kick out of it. I was going, yeah, I guess that's not the guy. We don't think of Bob Grant and think of raising money for charity. Think about money, shaking us down for political contributions.
It's like me walking in over St. Mary's Child Center, getting called. I'm Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Ballard. I get called into Ed Tracy's office, Democrat chairman of the Marion County party, and I walk in, and I open the door, and Rex Early is sitting there. And I wrote about it in the Star, and you sent me a very nice note, Bob, what I wrote about Rex's passing, and it was like, these guys, they all get tarred, really, but in the end, all of us have so much more in common in what we support or what we like or what we devoted to than the fights you see on TV or in the press. And I'm not blaming the media. I'm just saying, if all you knew about Ed Tracy and Rex Early was what you read or saw them say, you wouldn't realize they became great friends.
But I think it's also a tribute. And Jim, your era, Jim, Jan Carroll, Gordon, from Louisville, Englehart. I mean, La Follette. I mean, it was a whole different world. I mean, the media was after you in one sense, but it wasn't a got you. You gave them availability, but it was never personal. I mean, it was just never felt personal. Bob Orr used to tell me all the time, and Jim, he had a great deal of respect for you, but he would. There were very few people that really were after him in his mind. Right, mm-hmm. And he was not. He was always available. He did those weekly press conferences. He never, we'd go to every little community. He would stop because they'd ask some radio station. He would stop. He'd do 15 minutes. He'd say, "We're going to be 15 minutes. We'll do it." But it was a different sense then, and people were genuine.
Bob Rutherford, who was a radio reporter, knew that Bob Orr showed up for work at 7 every morning at the State House, and Rutherford would be waiting inside the north door and would walk to the office with him and do an interview. And I can't imagine a governor today just making himself available to a reporter in a hallway.
Yeah. Well, then Bob Orr, the other thing, Jim, I recall, because I was with him every time he did it, is that when he was lieutenant governor and there were issues, he would walk down to where the press shacks were, and he would knock on somebody's door and say, "Hey, I remember one time he was after somebody at the Star, and he said, I saw you read this, here's the facts." People are like, okay. But it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't like I'm going to go down there and I'm going to tell them, because he used to joke all the time. He says it's not going to make any difference because they're not going to change the story. But he said, I just want people to know what the facts were. I mean, and he was very much into that. But it was just a different time element. And when we think about the relationships that we all have, because nobody really felt. I mean, we can disagree. You and I disagree on certain things. We can disagree, but you can't hate people, right? It's just like, and now you see a lot of this is. And it really bothers me. Some of it is just so, it's like they just don't want to talk to you.
Overwrought, for sure. We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Bob Grand, are you ready?
Yep.
What was your first job?
My first job was delivering precinct materials in 1964.
What was your first concert?
Styx. At the Sherwood Club in Cherville.
What year?
God,
Ish?
70. You'd have to go by. I was going to look this up the other day because somebody else asked me this. I had to be like 73, 72, 73.
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
God, there's so many good books. I'll tell you because there's so many I can't think straight here. I'm just thinking of going through my mind all the books. The most recent book I read was the Churchill book, which was really fascinating given where we're at today.
The Boris Johnson one?
Yeah. No,
Martin Gilbert.
Yeah. So it was was fascinating about, all the things that he was proven right to be. It's just amazing. It was just amazing, and his ability to come back and his ability to convince them. It was just amazing, And I didn't know, and he was kind of a landed gentry kid, right? It was, kind of a. But boy, you talk about an interesting.
When you're born in Blenheim Palace, you're not struggling.
Yeah, exactly.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
I think I answered this question before, so I'll have to give a different answer. I would have liked to have seen Abraham Lincoln speak.
Any particular?
Gettysburg Address.
Only take 18 minutes.
Yeah.
3.5 minutes. Number 5, if you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, whom would you choose? Feel free to choose Shella.
Okay, Jim Shella.
Would Pat Rios choose Jim Shella?
Yes.
This is kind of an interesting one because I was thinking about it the other day. I would say Condoleezza Rice. I mean, I've met her a couple of times, but I think she would be fascinating to have dinner with.
And if you spoke Russian, you could have dinner in Russian.
Yeah.
Unbelievable brain and talent.
Yeah.
Jim, you got one more thing you want to ask him before we let him go?
I think we've covered pretty much everything.
Okay, yeah.
I think we have.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thanks for playing along.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest today has been attorney, civic leader, and charitable giver par excellence, Bob Grand. Bob, thank you.
Thank you.
Bob is known for one thing besides dressing really well. It's his loyalty. And a lot of us have prospered and been subject to that, and we're very grateful. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.